If you're a parent, you might expect yourself to automatically have the right skills and inherent ability to help your child thrive. Yet no matter your child's age, you've likely found that parenting is no easy task. As every child is unique, even the most prepared parents often find themselves struggling. If issues such as neurodivergence enter the picture, things can get even more challenging. And because there's no single tip that fits all situations, today's top expert has an impressive array of strategies, and they are research-backed, that can help children and their parents become more self-aware, resilient, and confident. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real-life question. My 9-year-old is on the autism spectrum. He was bullied at school, and he's really struggling now more than ever. The school took it seriously, but my son is really fidgety now, almost like he's ADHD. A friend of mine who is a therapist said it might be trauma from the bullying. I'm really confused and would like to know more. Can you talk about this? And with that issue as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manley, and this is Imperfect Love. Please note, as this episode may contain sensitive information, listener discretion is advised. If you need additional information, please see the special links in the show notes. Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manley, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are imperfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life. Today, I am joined by a top-notch guest, Dr. Debra Kessler, who will be sharing her expertise in many realms, including internal family systems and neurodivergence. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Kessler. It's such a joy to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure for me to join you, and thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to join you.
Well, thank you for being with us. So before we launch into the meat of today's podcast episode, could you tell our listeners just a little bit about what makes you, you?
Oh, I have such a passion for these kids that are wired differently. I would say it probably traces back to sort of recognizing there were some things that did not come particularly easy for me. And the idea that when you look at people who are real geniuses in their fields, many of them were wired differently, whether they're artists or scientists or musicians. And so being wired a little differently is not a deficit. It's a divergence. It adds breadth and texture and often gifts that get overlooked when we struggle to not fit into the norm or the standard expected picture. And so I have a real heart for these kids and their families. So a lot of it is about building acceptance.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. And it sounds as if this topic, this area really resonates with you on a deeply personal level. And so I think always a really beautiful place to start from when it's really meaningful in one's heart, one's, essence. So thank you for sharing that. Can we start just with some terminology, please? We often hear terms, phrases such as, I'm on the spectrum, I'm neurodivergent, I'm ADHD, and they're used often with good intent, but they've become a bit diluted so that people are throwing around terms or saying, I'm ADHD because they had too many cups of coffee, so that day they're ADHD. Yeah. Could you give us some grounding in terminology, please?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of terms that tend to get used to kind of in the common parlance to talk about variation of neurological function. And there are those things that are more, I would say, in the moment. You've had too much coffee, you didn't sleep very well. Some things are very anxiety provoking or challenging, and you might attribute it casually to a diagnostic category, which is unfair to the category itself and to those people who really fit into it. It's kind of like you hear people throw around, oh, they're schizophrenic. They don't really quite understand what that means. So the idea of neurodivergence is it is a different wiring pattern. So there's a variation in how you process or take in or experience information. And that is pervasive. And it's not just something that happens in the moment, although it is quite variable. So it lends a lot of complexity even to parents or teachers, because a child may look very intense and focused and engaged at one moment, and at another moment be checked out, disengaged, fidgety, otherwise. But that has to do with their arousal level and their regulation. So we really want to honor the fact that neurodivergence is more of a profile, and it is unique to the individual, and it is really, I would say, more foundational than that episode of too much coffee or a poor night's sleep.
Well phrased. And you're really differentiating between something that's situational, that's passing, that is in many cases self-induced. If somebody takes a stimulant, you're going to be edgy and fidgety. If you're not getting a good night's sleep, you might be also edgy and fidgety or sluggish. So we're looking at neurodivergence as somebody, as you said, it's a really beautiful way to put it, who is wired differently, is wired in a way that in a classroom, business, romantic situation, it doesn't present as one might expect a quote unquote normal person to present.
Yeah. And I want to just say, even the word normal kind of makes me get a little uncomfortable, because
that's why I put it in quotes.
Oh my gosh, there is this
maybe
dominant...
let's use expected. Maybe use the term expected. But even that is a bit difficult, because we're setting expectations that everybody should be in this medium range here, this middle range. So we'll have to find, what would you propose?
Well, there is a sort of notion about the dominant culture or the neurotypical. Those tend to be some of the language that can be used. And it is I saw an amazing meme. I really thought this was fantastic. It's like the square peg in the round hole. Trying to force the square peg into the round hole only damages the peg. And this is the problem with dominant culture, is if you expect the child or the individual who is wired differently to conform, you are in essence causing them to do the work to fit something that is quite not natural and quite challenging to them in a way that others aren't expected to have to adapt or manage or adjust to. And it's a really disproportionate burden. And that isn't to say the dominant culture needs to conform to that of the individual who's diverse, but it does mean that we need to move much more towards compassion and curiosity.
Those are two of my favorite words, compassion and curiosity, rather than continuing to hammer that square peg into the round hole. If we take a step back, and I'm sure, listeners, we can all think of a situation where somebody in a classroom was learning differently, and maybe they acted out a lot as a way to compensate. Maybe they were the really quiet one who just wilted away and didn't get any attention because they didn't know how to get their needs met. So it's generally those people in the middle are the ones who are the shining stars, either the shining stars or, those tend to get a lot of attention in a positive way. But often we find in, friendship circles, in classroom settings, in work environments, if we're not aware that somebody is neurodivergent, it's not that they're necessarily bored or that they had too much caffeine every day or that they can't learn. It's often that they are learning differently, and that if we pause with compassion and curiosity and think, Yeah, I wonder. I remember one time somebody was trying to teach me something, and I kept saying, if you would draw it for me,
Right.
that would be so helpful. I do a really great, much better when I see a visual. And this person kept telling me. And I'm sure to them I seemed somewhat stupid, but I knew I do better with visual aids.
Absolutely.
And so there was a lack of compassion on the other side of being able to say, this person knows what they need. They're telling me what they need. Can I have the compassion to give them what they need? And it's this much more so with children, because often they don't know to say, I will learn better if you give me, something for my hands. I will tactile. I will learn better if you give me a visual aid. I will learn better by doing this. And so could you coach us for those parents out there who might not know what we're talking about these different styles of learning?
Yeah. So, there's so much dimension to deconstruct in that question, because one of the foundational pieces is the question of regulation or arousal. Are we in a zone? Are we in that space where we are regulated enough to engage? Are we calm and alert, which is a regulated state, rather than on defense, on guard, because things are threatening and coming at me too much too fast, or my body doesn't feel well, things are coming at me in ways that I feel I need to protect myself? Or the other side where I am dampening down, shutting out, checking out, because I am also needing to protect myself. So the notions of some of the behaviors is they are defending or protecting the individual, but they get seen as disruptive, maladaptive, problematic kinds of behaviors. So that flip right there is immense. When you see behavior that seems out of the box, considering it as defensive or protective because the child or the individual is overwhelmed or understimulated. So that is a really foundational piece. Are they in that alert processing window? So that's
and many times they are not.
Many times, and just consider ourselves, that coffee you're talking about is trying to bring somebody into their alert processing window. They are too dampened down. They're tired. They're winding down. They want to bring their physiology up. They take coffee. That is, an understandable effort to do that. Well, children are learning about where that arousal state needs to be. It doesn't come without sort of beginning to notice and name and find what regulation is for them. So that's one facet.
And a really important foundational facet, because kiddos often don't have that self-awareness to be able to say, right now I'm not learning really well because I didn't get a good night of sleep, or because mommy and daddy were arguing and I got really scared, or because my big brother hit me, or because I was bullied in the schoolyard this morning, or because I don't know why. I just am not at the same speed these other people in my classroom are. So they may, that would still take a lot of awareness to be, because we know we're not at the same speed, but sometimes we can't verbalize it, or we feel ashamed of it, or we have been shamed by it. So you're hitting on some really key points that can help parents realize this isn't a one and done thing. This is an ongoing attunement to that child's needs, because just like adults' needs change, kiddos' needs, they are changing at warp speed, and being able to have that curiosity and compassion. And some parents might think, oh, but I'm too tired. I'm too worn out. I work full time and I can't be tuning into my child every day to see what but the truth is, if we lean into this habit of being curious, of being really interested, it can save us a lot of time and energy in the long run. What do you think of that, Dr. Kessler?
I have got to say that I think kids create a doorway into a better understanding of ourselves. Because if we haven't even asked the questions of ourselves, when am I regulated? How does it feel when I'm dysregulated? Then it's hard to bring that question to your child. So I think these kids help us grow. And often when you're running that hard and that fast, you're not paying attention to your own needs. So it's an amazing the families that I've worked with, the lights that flash on and the doors that open to their own awareness of their own regulation allow them to say, you know what, I'm not really regulated in the moment. They don't have to say that verbally, but they can recognize maybe they need to go put cold water on their face. Maybe they need to do some breathing. Maybe they need to step away for a moment and validate and acknowledge the stress or the overwhelm they're experiencing in a kind, compassionate way, which is where the internal family systems piece comes in because they bring kindness to themselves. They can create space to be the parent they want to be to come back to their child and be in a place that's more receptive and curious.
So, could you tell us a little bit before we go any deeper? Internal family systems, which I think is a fabulous modality. Some people might not know what we're talking about. So, do you mind giving us an explanation on internal family systems?
Yeah, internal family systems is a wonderful body of work that's brought to us by the work of Richard Schwartz. And the general notion of it is that our core being is inevitably good and universally present. And what ends up happening is as we navigate through various episodes in our lives, we learn how to adapt from that younger place. And those strategies become like internal parts. They become ways in which we learned to operate, to manage in interaction. And each one of them have their own story, their own function, their own history, their own set of agendas, all in service to us. And the notion of internal family systems is beginning to create a relationship between yourself, your coreness, with these parts of yourself that have evolved to take care of you or to adapt and function in the world, but really aren't your full self, but they have been your allies. Sometimes they become larger in terms of the space that they take up, and you operate within them because you've learned to protect and defend using that strategy. And that's a part that has basically dominated how you manage because it's been very functional until you get to a point in life where you begin to recognize you might need a relationship with it because it's no longer serving.
Beautifully put. And I really, in our clinical practices, you probably see it every day. And I see it often, especially if I'm working with a family where you're dealing with somebody who is, let's say, 40 years old and another person who is 55 years old or 60 years old, but you're seeing behavior come out that feels very much like a 9-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 6-year-old. And it's nothing at all to laugh at. It is these parts are very important. They're there, as you said, they're very old and they're there to protect and defend, but they don't, and they served their purpose when they arose. They were there for a reason. They're not consciously created, but they're very old and highly protected. And so when they're coming out in adult relationships, they tend to create quite a lot of dysfunction. And the work that you're talking about is about getting to know these parts, recognize these parts, and help them know when they're not needed any longer.
I think the idea is really loving them and letting them step back to be the advisors that they can be, because one of the core principles is there are no bad parts. We need to be able to rise to certain occasions, and we need to honor and really accept each of them. And I think that's one of the issues, is that we kind of can get into cycles with hating parts of ourselves. Right? And then we begin
and that's
to
never
spiral.
helpful. Yeah. That being able, again, back to the compassion piece,
Yeah.
being able to look at them and say, okay, I don't need you right now. You can go and sit in this chair over here. Thank you. Thank you. You can go sit over here. And always being kind to these parts, because again, as you said, they arise early as a way to protect, as a way to, so they have really served a purpose. And sometimes they get activated and are not quite so helpful. And so, yes, no bad parts, just parts that we want to have other parts that are more helpful in that situation, be able to step forward.
Yes. So, just as we're talking about this, that notion we were talking about, the parent being able to step away from the child so they can attend to the part of themselves that feels so exhausted and so just wants to have space. Being compassionate. Yeah, you're really exhausted right now. You've worked really hard right now. I can really honor this desire to kind of check out right now. Oof, that makes so much sense. Oh, and moving away from that judgment of that can open up some space to come back to the child. And then we think back about that case that you were talking about, the child who experiences trauma, they are going to create parts to deal with that trauma, right? As much as they can. I'm not good. I'm going to learn to hide. I'm going to get fidgety. I'm going to, whatever it is, to try to navigate the overwhelm, right? That was part of that traumatic or really painful experience with being the victim or the subject of mockery or bullying at school.
And you phrased it so well that the parents seeing this child, just giving a recap to what you said, the parents seeing this child knows they were bullied, likely feels somewhat helpless, confused, scared. Friend says, oh, it might be trauma. And you're bringing it back again to the internal family systems, the parts, and the child. It makes sense. They got very scared, whatever the bullying looked like, whatever. And the coping strategies, the fidgeting, the whatever it is that they're doing somehow felt protected. And so again, you're saying, and I really want to focus on this for listeners, regardless of how old a child is, being able, we hear it so much, being able to put on your oxygen mask before you could put it on your child or anybody else. And this sounds like that's, again, one of these situations for the mom to be able to engage in some self-care, some self-reflection, to say, what are my needs right now? Mom, am probably sad and scared and feel a bit powerless here. And I know, my goodness, as a mom myself, when we're sending our kids off to school, whether it's, kindergarten, grade school, high school, college, it's still that, oh my gosh, I'm not there to protect them anymore. They're on there. Wow, this is scary. So that makes sense for the mom to have some compassionate attention for herself so that then she can get a little, and it's great that she reached out because that is showing her message sounded very compassionate and very curious, yet scared.
And the other piece that comes to mind as you're mentioning that is, did the mom get bullied herself in school? Right? It's like, who was there for me? So we're talking probably 30 years ago when she came home from school and undoubtedly somebody was not kind or there was a slight. How did she handle that? What was the part that came up to help her navigate that? And is that coming up in terms of how she's seeing her child? That is so common. And the other thing that's so interesting is you're talking about a mom and a son. What I find interesting is dads and sons and mothers and daughters. It can echo much more intensively when it's a child of the same gender, when they were at that age.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're right. It's interesting, right? Because often I was just working with a case this week where it was a dad and a child I imagine the child was, I think, 9, and the dad was really, you could see the dad joining with the child's issues, really singing. And I think he became very aware of it, that what was coming up with the child was actually stimulating all of this trauma that was unresolved within him.
Yes.
And then when we're in that place, we are not necessarily the best resource for that child, because whatever's getting triggered in us really needs to have some love and soothing and calming so that we can see a little more clearly and help a little more clearly.
Absolutely. And then we get back to the child's regulation. We get back to a child who might be wired a little differently than that parent, or similarly. It's hard to say. Sometimes, these things can run in families. The idea, what was the child's sensory profile? So I already brought up regulation, but what was bullying for this particular child takes some digging deep to figure out, what was it that they experienced? Was it sights? Was it sounds? Was it something about their ability to motorically move in response? Was it about their interpretation of what was being said to them? Now we're moving more into the relevance system, but that deconstruction can only be engaged in with a parent who sat back enough to create space for the child to get curious about who they are and how they present in the world and engage with the world as it presents to them.
And that makes perfect sense, because you're really slowing it down to look at, again, who this child is, not that the parent's experience isn't important. It is important. And if it's triggering something in the parent where in school or in their family, they were left out, or they were bullied, or they felt rejected, or they felt scared, all of those things are very important to attend to. And then jumping into where the child is, being able to see, not tell the child how they're feeling, but ask the child, what was this like for you? Tell me, I'm here to listen. How did your body feel? What was happening for you? Not peppering the child with questions. And maybe that's sometimes where a professional can come in and be of support. And there's no shame in that. Parents aren't trained to be psychologists, and not child psychologists. That's a very special, your child psychologist is a very specialized type of psychology. And so not being at all afraid or ashamed to reach out, whether it's to the school to try and get support. Sometimes they have great resources, or through individual psychotherapy, so that you can understand, because parenting isn't easy. And being able to do some self-healing so that then you can be more present in finding out what the child really needs, rather than we all have had things occur in our past that distort our lens, so to speak. And the more we're aware that that distortion is there, we can't ever remove it entirely, because we're humans. But if we're aware that it's there, like, oh, I was traumatized as well in school, so that might be getting really active in me. And then we're able to be more curious and present and supportive for that child.
Yeah. And when you say slowing it down, it is artful, because often we don't have the language until we go on that journey with our child. Because, as you say, many of us didn't develop a language about how to invite reflective function. And when you're asking a direct verbal cognitive question, it requires a verbal cognitive capacity to reflect. And when we have neurodiversity with systems that get overwhelmed and flooded, being able to reflect and name is a journey together.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. And on a really basic level, listeners, there may have been times in your life where you couldn't even state an emotion that you felt. You were too confused or flooded that saying, I'm happy, sad, all that might come out is okay or fine. So these are some pieces that we can likely recognize in ourselves and realize that kids, again, regardless of their age, they can have that same experience. I think it's one of the reasons sometimes that giving a child a crayon or a chance to, do some sort of artwork or move, whatever that child wants and needs to do, sometimes we're able to see it better if we give them that space and look for what they're telling us. Oh my goodness, I'm thinking of how you said earlier about the fidgeting, and that part is fidgeting. Sometimes the body movements alone are telling a story.
Yes. And how often do, kids with an ADHD profile under that neurodiversity kind of umbrella, they get told 6 million times, sit still, stop fidgeting, stop doodling, you're disruptive. So those shame things, right? That those micro traumas get set in, that I am a bad kid and yet they're struggling to really be adaptive as they can. And their efforts are getting challenged. So it's quite a journey. And again, from an adult perspective, it's very interesting when you start thinking about, I'm going to just use a slight metaphor. When you go to thinking about cooking or wine tasting, anything like that, you have the opportunity to begin to narrate the complexity of the maybe 2 senses, maybe 3, taste, smell, and texture. And if you take that and you recognize that a young person has all of that going on and no language, right? Because then you add to it motor and touch, right? As well as proprioceptive and vestibular. It's huge.
It is huge. And again, we as adults, as imperfect, we're all imperfect beings. And so we have to give ourselves grace and compassion and not expect ourselves to know these things, because we often just aren't educated in them. And if we're not educated in something, we just don't automatically know it. And some of the education certainly comes from the formal education, and a lot of it comes from early childhood education within the family system. And there is often a lot of education in those systems that is not very helpful, that is not attuned, that is not loving, that is not kind, compassionate. And so when we realize, we as parents, and I can certainly speak from personal experience, I didn't grow up in a family environment where emotional intelligence and attunement was, things like that were modeled. Not at all, quite the opposite. And so we have to give ourselves grace as we, as individuals, and then adults and parents and partners, as we learn these skills and ideally pass them on in healthy ways and loving ways. That's not something to be ashamed of. It's something to be proud of. Every time I get a listener question, I am so delighted, because I'm saying to myself, this is someone who was open enough and caring enough. They care enough to reach out and send in a question. And that's huge.
So aware, right? So aware to be able to verbalize it. And so, so bold, so confident, so loving to put it out there, right? And I go back to, our children are our best teachers. When we begin to look at them, they help us open doors into the experience of humanity, our humanity, their humanity, and understanding really much more about others.
I agree with you 100%. And I remember you saying that a little earlier in the episode, and I didn't dive into it, and so we'll dive into it now, that it is so important when we see, not only are we here to educate and support and love and care for our children, but if we pay attention to them and use their feedback or even their very presence as a way to become more attuned to the self, more attuned to the child, more attuned to the self, and then it's just this lovely cycle of increased attunement that can certainly help us grow and become, as more resilient adults, more confident adults, and certainly where it starts is more aware. Because I'm a big believer that if we are not self-aware in really kind, compassionate, growth-oriented ways, then our journey is going to be a lot less fruitful than when we learn to use that mindfulness to be aware of how our body's feeling, what our mind is doing, how we're using our feelings, thoughts, mindset, energy, actions, that loop, And yes, it makes life a little less, snap of the fingers because we're slowing down, but then our responses are generally much more positive in the short term and long term.
Yeah, the thing that comes up for me when you say all of that is like this other really important word, and that's presence. Mm. When you're slowing down, you're actually getting more present. And we are often so invested in future tripping. I'm anxious about, I'm already planning about, I have the grocery list about. And so this practice of being fully present, not dismissing those responsibilities, but recognizing when you're in your head versus when you're really observing the child yourself in the moment.
I love that you highlighted that because I am such a believer in that gift of presence in a world where there is so much that is going on with people believing that multitasking is really great and that we can talk to somebody while we're also texting somebody else. We can have a conversation while we're watching, a movie or social media clips, whatever's happening. And I know that when somebody is tuning into me with focused eyes, with an open heart, I feel very differently than when somebody is giving me a quarter of their time that they're pretending is, full time. And we can see it in children. When we, kneel down and really tune into a child and we're there and we're present, even if we're reading a book to them for 5 minutes and we're all in, they get that 5 minutes. They know we're all in. And if we're distracted and we're on the phone while we're kind of half playing with them, they understand that as well. And then we expect them to be 100% tuned in when we want something, but they haven't had that modeled for them. They've had these distracted adults who are trying to multitask. And so, of course, it makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, bring up so many thoughts come to my mind because I'm having this notion about one of the things that I find that I spend really a lot of my focus on with families is validation. And that core concept gets very misconstrued because validation is not agreeing with. And it takes some time because you also have to get out of your own way. You have to sort of validate yourself. Oh, if I'm really tired, I can see that. That makes so much sense. In order to create space to really see and validate your child. And the mismatch, this imperfect love, this mismatch piece can be that why is it bothering you that we're in a mall that's loud? I'm not bugged by that. But your child is overwhelmed by the sounds and the movement of others and the smells. So this is being able to truly validate and say, oh my gosh, it makes sense that you want to leave because you're letting me know something's too much for you. Thank you for letting me know that.
I love this example because it reminds me of often I'll be working with a parent who will have 2 kids, sometimes 3. They're like, this particular child is not like child A and child B. I don't know what to do with them because this child's a self-starter and this one's a self-starter and this one. And I'm thinking, okay, they're all 3 your children, but they are all their own unique beings.
Absolutely.
And while 2 of them may seem more similar than the third one, when we stop comparing, it's such a gift not only to the self, because then you realize, oh, I have 3 individual beings here. 3, they're all different and they're all going to have different needs. So not only are you tuning into yourself and acknowledging that truth, but then you free those children from that yoke of having to be compared to somebody. And then we're able to see that first, second, and third child and see their own unique gifts. And help them learn to breathe into their gifts and see themselves as, how important it is. We're kind of back to where you started, where you were saying about so many people who have been incredible gifts to society. Are what we would now call neurodivergent. Because being neurodivergent, you are inherently not seeing the world the same way as other people. So if you
Yes.
pause to see the gifts in that,
Yes.
it's amazing.
It is. And I think the other big thing that I want to highlight is sometimes we can really handicap our children when we try to gild the lily all the time, when we try to help them see that things aren't as bad as they think. And validation, maybe it's really hard. This really feels bad. This might be really uncomfortable. That's going to create resilience that they then know how to deal with things that are uncomfortable or don't feel good. And then they have the courage to go out in the world to be their unique selves. And I think that's a really important idea because so often we want to comfort children. And what we end up doing is handicapping them from being able to be okay with their uncomfortable feelings. And they are going to have them, especially when they have to navigate in waters that are not directly suited for them.
I want to highlight that last piece you said about learning to be okay with uncomfortable feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a critical point for adults and for the adults who are teaching kiddos. And listeners, even if you don't have kiddos of your own, or even if they're grown, we are modeling for people all the time in situations where you don't even know we're modeling. Maybe you're an aunt, maybe you're a teacher, maybe you're, in the medical field, maybe you're out walking and you have a dog that you're, modeling your behavior with the dog, whatever it might be. Being able to realize that no feeling is good or bad inherently.
Yes.
They are all messengers. They are all valid feelings. And some of them are more uncomfortable.
Yes.
For many women, anger is very uncomfortable. For many men, anger is about the only emotion that they were trained to allow themselves to be, that the parent said, oh, don't cry, you'll be a sissy. Or women are told to be nice and be good and, oh, don't be angry. So when we as adults make friends with our emotions and learn to use them, learn to listen, learn to detangle them, because sometimes something that presents as sad is more anger. Sometimes something that presents as anger is actually more sad or disappointment. And getting used to this so that we are then able to help our children realize exactly what you're saying, Dr. Kessler, that it's okay if they're sad. It's okay if they're angry. And it's how they manage it. We want to teach them healthy ways to manage it, not to punch someone and things like that. But as they learn that it's okay to cry when your bike fell.
Yes.
It's okay to be sad if you got a C on your paper and you wanted a B or an A. And we don't have to fix, because we won't always be there to fix our kiddos' lives. We're much better off if we, as you said, if we work toward giving them the tools, this, as you say, the skill set to be able to manage things as better and better as they move throughout life. Oh my goodness, you've given us such great information. Just as we wind up, could you give some final tips of what you might, if you were to summarize, and you can offer more than this, but if you were to summarize from a mom or dad in this situation or a similar situation where they're really feeling like, something's off here. There's this new behavior and I can't quite put the pieces together, but something's off with my kiddo. What would you recommend?
My go-to is going to sound very familiar, is connection. Which means you have to be present, you need to be curious, you need to be open, you need to not jump to conclusions or fixing. It's just that space where you can be with and be okay with being with whatever it is that's showing up. My kid's having a fit. I can be with that. You notice my shoulders drop and my voice settles, right? I can be with this. My kiddo is crying. I can be with them. I don't need to fix. Right? Now, sometimes we feel pressure to do 6 million other things at those moments, especially if there are multiple kids and multiple demands. And so sometimes we need to put a bookmark in things and come back to them. But often there are fewer things that are absolute urgent demands so there is maybe 5 or 10 minutes. I just have to tell a little story. My daughter was 16 and she had just learned to drive. And she's a very responsible individual, very. She backed into a parked car. That was her first and only accident.
Uh-oh.
That child came home and cried and cried and cried and was so disappointed with herself and didn't know what to do. And I finally had to say to her after a while, I have to go to work in about half an hour. I'm going to stay with you until then. But I needed to put a bookmark in it. So there are times when you can set limits on things, that things can transition. And the idea that it doesn't have to go on forever, the idea that it can be expressed, it can be held, it can also be revisited later. And if an opportunity was missed, you can go back and repair. There's no reason you can't go back a day or two later and say, you said something really important the other day, and I think I missed that. And I just want to come back and say, I've been thinking about that.
Absolutely. And those are really good nuggets of truth. And when I think about you and your daughter and you having to leave and just that time you sat with her, and I think we forget as parents, as partners, as friends, sometimes back to the idea of the gift of presence, sometimes the greatest gift, we want to fill that space with doing. We want to fill it with words. We want to fill it with fixing. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give to the self, child, significant other, whomever it is just sitting there and saying, I'm here. I'm here.
Exactly.
And sometimes to a kiddo or an adult, what do you need right now? Do you need heard? Yeah. Do you need help? Do you need hugged? And sometimes the answer is, I don't know. And you just say, it's okay, then I'll just sit here. I'll be at the table with you. And sometimes they'll say, I don't want that. Say, oh, okay, I'll be over here. And the simple acts like that show attunement, because we're not making it about us. We're making it about what do you need? And sometimes parents will say to me, but I was quiet and I took them on a drive and I didn't say anything. Well, did you have the music on in the car, right? Was the music on? Well, yeah, I'm really uncomfortable with silence. Well, maybe next time, just turn off the music. See because sometimes kids or partners or friends in those silences, they will find that courage or the timing will be right for them to say, I'm sad, or they'll start sobbing or whatever it might be. So we as parents and partners sometimes can do a little better at just making space for silence.
So as you're saying that, just my last thought is that is when the part that's dysregulated can feel the strength and the acceptance of the self that the parent is modeling in that moment. And that I think that closes the whole circle that we've been really addressing today. So thank you for bringing that up. I just think that's such a great reminder of how the self can show up and be kind to these dysregulated, important, informative little ones, little parts inside of ourselves that are struggling with a moment.
Absolutely. And I love how you brought us full circle, because when I do parts work, I always remember, if we're able to see that tiny child, or looking at an adult, or we're looking at a 10-year-old, but their 2-year-old is really active. If we learn to, instead of saying, grow up.
Oh, Lord.
Right? Instead of taking that attitude, instead of saying, oh, and we can see it, just not necessarily naming it, because that's usually not helpful to a child. I see your 2-year-old acting up. That's not necessarily very helpful. Yeah. We just look and go, there's this little part that's speaking right now, okay. And so we allow ourselves that gift of compassionate presence. Dr. Kessler, thank you so much for your wisdom, your positive energy, all of your kindness. Thank you for joining us today. It's been such a delight.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to engage with you on this. As you can tell, I'm just so privileged to be involved with, help with, and learn about these individuals and their families. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And Dr. Kessler, where can our listeners find you?
So I have a website. It's very straightforward. It's drdebrakessler.com. And I have an Instagram, so they can find me on that as well. So I've also listed on my website various resources that I've drawn information from. And I'm happy to consult and advise and support families on their journey. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share today.
Thank you, Dr. Kessler, and listeners. As always, Dr. Kessler's information will be in the show notes. So especially if you're driving, you don't have to write anything down. You can look at the show notes. Spelling on Dr. Kessler's name is Debra, Debra. Last name is Kessler, Kessler. And also, in closing, listeners, I thank you, as always, for the gift of your presence, your energy, and just being on the journey of imperfect love. And thanks again, Dr. Kessler, and this is Imperfect Love. Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanley.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manley wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And, as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.